New Hot Wheels Super Tracks. Only the fastest car wins.
As a fan of fast cars and racing, it wouldn't be a surprise for most of us to be driven into collecting some model kits every now and then. One of the biggest examples would be Hot Wheels, a brand many of us would be familiar with as it has grown massively since its inception in 1968, resulting in a bunch of shows, movies, and video game adaptations or collaborations. But this is not our primary subject for this video. Let's instead shift our focus towards the land of the rising sun, to a company named Takara, with their model car series ChoroQ. These were designed similarly to what is called as a chibi art style, with how the car models are squished to only be around 3 to 4 centimeters long, even though the cars themselves are based on actual models. Despite the case, this model line is quite popular with adults as well, due to its fairly intricate and accurate model design quality. So just like Hot Wheels, it shouldn't be surprising to see them get some video game adaptations themselves, and you wouldn't believe just how many there are from the first title in 1984 to the latest 30 years later. So we start off with the first game that was introduced to me, ChoroQ 3. Despite the name, this is actually the 8th title in the series, developed by Tamsoft and released in the year 1998 for the PS1. This is one of the many titles in the series that never got an overseas release, requiring the use of a fan-made translation patch. The game itself has the simplest goal of winning the ultimate Grand Prix, but the path is not as straightforward. At the start, we're given the choice between 6 bodies, based on certain real-life cars or models that were available in the toy model. They don't really do anything besides cosmetics, but that's mainly because the game itself is more of a car RPG than a regular racing game, so performance upgrades are done based on each category, with the body simply changing the exterior visuals. For the first phase of the game, it's just the simple task of beating the available racetracks within the podium, which is not exactly easy. So what does the driving feel like? It's a bit of a mixed bag if I have to be honest. The steering is a bit fickle. The longer you hold, the more you slide. Let go of the acceleration and the turn radius goes wider, letting players take sharper corners, but if you try to accelerate while turning, the car instantly loses control and spins out. Being in midair also completely disables controls and steering, which may seem fine at first. However, certain tracks place bumps and ramps in corners that enforces proper entry positioning, turning these tracks into a case of trial and error. That's on top of the game having the average PS1 racing game collision system, where every contact, regardless of the context, is always a penalty to the player. The opponents are pretty much hard-railed on their path, meaning any corners with them is always a dangerous position for the player. It's quite devastating when the opponent themselves are ruthless, with the first place guy constantly pulling away from the pack, making most races almost impossible to get first place on the first attempt. You could do some practice runs in the free run option. However, some tracks are just borderline impossible without some upgrades first. So let's take a visit to the town first. The town menu also comes with hints to help with progression, as they'll tell you what to discover in this exploration phase. Right across the starting points are the first available shops with the parts store for upgrades, with each affecting the performances of the cars with engines, affecting acceleration, transmission for top speed, and the option to go for automatic or manual. Tires for grip with its type determining more grip on or off-road, with some niche options for the wet tracks and snowy tracks. Steering to adjust the turn radius alongside the sensitivity, and brakes for faster braking or reducing the chances of tire locking when braking while turning. Additionally, there are options here to change some of the more superficial features like the UI, rims, or horn sounds. Majority of the upgrades will be pretty linear, but with some examples that I've shown, they can also provide side upgrades for different preferences. Some later upgrades can even turn the cars into monster trucks in order to bypass obstacles and even add in different challenges on the races. Next to the parts shop is a thrift store to sell unwanted parts that we own, a body shop to switch out with the 24 car model options, and right across is the body paint shop, where we can choose between 4 preset decal options and color combinations. Luckily, we don't have to revisit these shops from town every time. Once you discover them, you can instantly jump to these stores, and this feature will also be available to some other content from around town as well. And in most menu screens, you can press the triangle button to open the car parts screen, which lets us switch out parts at any time. But the town itself is more than just a collection of shops and upgrades. Explore beyond the first street and you'll see for yourself. Locations strewn all over town covered things like the new racetracks. They're mandatory as progression requires finding and unlocking them. Some extra test tracks like the drag strip for testing acceleration and top speed, the maze track for a fun mini game split into 5 different stages, dirt and snow test tracks to help gauge the car's capability in these specific off-road sections. But there's also the other activities we can partake in, like crashing into a fire hydrant, jamming to the game's complete soundtrack with a city jukebox, beating the gambling addiction via lottery tickets and casino, doing some delivery jobs around town, and tons of other goofy stuff like being part of Majima's pirate crew. A lot of these activities reward Choro coins, and they will usually be listed by the information boards scattered all over the map. Some of them are quite obscure until looking up these boards, so it's worth checking out some of the boards for information. Once we are done with exploration, then it's time to go back to the single races, with all of the tracks unlocked, each providing its fair share of challenges just from the different terrain and track design, which heavily encourages players to unlock multiple car parts to switch between at any time. Unfortunately, this is where the game's grindy nature starts to pop in, as winning in most racetracks requires a solid upgrade build. In some tracks, even getting a podium finish becomes almost impossible without the necessary upgrades, with each track providing payouts on a consistent scaling, alongside a very minimal bonus for not getting into any collisions. It may require repeat wins to get upgrades for the more advanced tracks later. The designs for this game itself is actually pretty unique and charming, with a lot of clear inspirations from kart racers, resulting in a ton of wacky combinations for both visuals and presentations, like how each track has their own corresponding sound effects and music attached. But once each track has been finished on the podium, the true gauntlet of the game begins, unlocking a brand new feature with the Grand Prix races, taking you through each racetrack without the ability to restart races and a score total to tally. That's on top of the fact that the AI are better than they were in single races, with later Grand Prix introducing new racers that are significantly faster than the last. And unlike in single racers, you must finish the Grand Prix in first place to progress. Luckily, payouts per race are increased from the single race variants, and between races we are allowed to do anything else for pretty much an infinite amount of time, giving a ton of time to prepare, which coincides with the appearance of brand new stores in the town, giving out more upgrade parts, some of which are not available in previous shops, more linear upgrade progressions, 24 more body models to dress up at each body shop, and a ton of new tracks to check out like the Haunted Mansion, Jungle Cave, Snow Resort, and Underwater Temple tracks, even some that are catered towards monster truck builds with the dirt track and big tire tracks, most of which will be scattered throughout the 3 different GPs, with the last one being our final goal of the game. Beating each GP itself will unlock a bunch of new features from even more shops, or the ability to switch the time of day for both races and town explorations, providing way more places to play around in, or just indulge in some dumb fun. And the game isn't necessarily over once every GP is beaten. There are more things to 100% this game with, like the hundreds of events scattered all over the town, some new mystery shops, hidden secrets, and rewards to be discovered. The game itself is ripe with charm and details regarding its presentation, but the core gameplay itself being the worst part of the experience can be a massive turnoff, so maybe that is something they would address and touch upon in the later releases. In the next 2 years after the release of ChoroQ 3, Takara would publish several releases for the series, all by completely different developers and consoles with their own spin and ideas. Unfortunately, most of them would be released exclusively in Japan, with only one of them making out to the overseas market, severely limiting the publicity of the series outside of Japan. That is until the PS2 generation arrived to the scene, which leaves us with the most well-known series in the franchise with the HG series. This is the series many have recommended to me ever since my delve into obscure Japanese racing games 2 years ago, so I think it would be apt to start by going through in chronological order. The first title, being HG1, was released in 2000. Developed by Barnhouse Effect and published by Conspiracy Entertainment in the US or Midas Interactive in the EU. To overcomplicate things, the title is known as Gadget Racers in the US and Penny Racers in the EU. The generational structure of the game itself is not that different from ChoroQ 3. with some adjustments to be expected. For example, this title ditches the town exploration segment and just plops everything in a menu, and the racing content has been significantly expanded with many new additions to the franchise, with the addition of license tests, regulation, and spec races, with the car RPG system getting a ton of new stat modifiers, tools, and features that straight up changes how the races can play out. But let's dive into them one by one. As a new player, the license test is probably going to be the most lucrative for tutorials and learning what the game has to offer, and it pretty much serves its purpose in that front, with 3 license tiers each containing 10 different tests, each tier test being pretty much the same, only with different cars. This may feel tedious at first, but it does serve the purpose of teaching players how each car specification would handle. While this game has done wonders compared to ChoroQ 3, the car can still spin out, but the rate of it happening has been reduced drastically, and the addition of a handbrake option increased maneuverability by a significant margin. With the ability to brake even in mid-air, even bumps and ramps are now a lot more manageable, and as a bonus, the way the cars bounce makes it seem more toy-like to mimic the IRL toys. All of these quirks will be necessary to learn to win in these license tests, as some of them are quite challenging thanks to the car setups, especially if you're going for all gold. Despite this, however, there are no bonuses for getting all silver or gold in the license test. Clearing them doesn't even grant free cars like how it would be in other racing games. The only reward license tests provide in this game is to give you a clearance to enter the Grand Prix races, which is necessary for progression anyways, and hey, we get some proper tutorials out of them. So how are we progressing here then? Progression in this game is a bit similar to games like Gran Turismo than anything else, mainly for the structure. We got single races, Grand Prix, and the many regulation or spec type races that are required to beat the game. And we can do these in any order we want. So let's start with the single races. They're the simplest events in the game and are mainly separated by difficulty tiers, each containing different tracks with varying complexity and AI performance to match. These races are straightforward. Achieve first place in each track within a difficulty tier, and the game will drop a new car body as a reward. The payouts themselves are quite average for each difficulty tier, but there are changes with how it's handled. Bonuses from no collisions are much more lucrative this time around, giving an extra 50%, and collision detection has been improved, as it now only counts collisions between drivers instead of every single environmental bump. It's a good decision, as the developers this time seem to have realized just how difficult it is to not hit any walls with how narrow a lot of the tracks and shortcuts are designed. And it also helps out a lot now that repeat wins get a payout cut as well. The way tracks are laid out in the single races are also helpful in teaching players the ramping difficulty from the track design, now that the track have lots of mixes of tarmac, off-road, wet, and snowy environments, covering pretty much the bases with closed circuits, seaside beach tracks, the North Pole expedition, amusement park, jungle temples, and deserts, each with new gimmicks from the environmental hazards and the gadgets required to deal with them, like the inflatable floater to avoid driving underwater and losing a ton of speed, or alternatively the propeller that can both work above and underwater for a speed boost. The wing can help avoid obstacles, or the ski sled providing a grip boost on snow and ice surfaces. While each of these gimmicks have undoubtedly given a bit more depth to the car RPG side of the game, it has also broken the balance of the game in some aspects, while also making the game a lot more grindy than what it should have been. Like, for example, take the ski sled for a bit. The grip boost that it provides can be great, but it also can be ignored in exchange for off-road or snow tires. Meanwhile, things like the wing outright lets you erase an entire section of a track, making winning outright impossible without it, as some AI opponents are always assigned with at least one of these tools on each race. On the upside, we only ever need one type of each gadget, as other versions introduced in the later shops are more of a side grade than outright linear upgrades, and they will come in handy for their own specific race events later, as the specification races can cover the basic classifications like engine regulations and off-road regulations. But then we get to stuff like body regulations, requiring specific body types for the challenges from work vehicles, race cars, color-specific body kits, and for some reason, the chicken race game mode. Part regulations which cover untuned parts, coin holders, and each of the specific gadgets. There's even the endurance races which ups the lap count, while enabling features like tire wear and damage, affecting both handling and acceleration depending on their health. adding more onto the challenge thanks to the game starting you in the middle of the pack with the massively increased car count in races, and the pit stop feature to counter set damage. This kinda explains why there are now parts that increase stats like offense and defense, as this mode allows the ability to damage other cars to make them slower. Endurance rules are also applied for Grand Prix races, making them long challenging gauntlets, which unfortunately does not pay out as much as it used to be. And I think this is a good part to talk about this game's biggest weakness, its UI design. It's a pretty massive detriment for this game, as the game is mostly compromised of jumping between so many hoops just to switch between pages. They didn't even tell you about the right button being used to access menus via shortcut, which is super important as exiting the Grand Prix menu like normal makes the game think you want to forfeit instead. And then there's the part where they don't drop any notification for a new race event, which extends the time spent on the menus just to check each regulation page. Beyond the UI problems, there's also the classic issue of difficulty in this game, where there's usually one opponent that will suddenly get a power boost either at the start or after halfway of the race, forcing you to grind on other races and purchase the necessary upgrades, which pretty much covers a whole lot of things in this game specifically. We got basics for performance with engine and ECU affecting acceleration and top speed, alongside the transmission which can set the car for manual or automatic, chassis for weight and durability in endurance races, brakes and steering for general handling improvements, the HUD, horn and rims for purely entertainment and visual customization, and a new addition for this game with the body kits. Most of them will be basic items like more aerodynamic bumpers, better offensive and defensive capability, with tougher exterior parts, some pure cosmetic upgrades, or the gadgets that have been mentioned before. Most of the upgrades, however, are not exactly useless once a better part comes up, thanks to the regulation spec events, so keeping that old engine or transmission can be helpful for the later events. And since most upgrades here are designed to be side grades instead of an objectively better upgrade, you don't necessarily have to buy new parts every single time a new one pops up, which seems to be unlocked after beating a number of events via new store menus. These can also cover the body shops, as well as also featuring tons of bodies based on the toy line. Additionally, there is the tuning shop, offering the ability to upgrade bodies and parts for better stats or to change the car's drivetrain. Then the trade-in shops for selling parts, paint shops with the rim color option, preset colors, liveries, and a car wash for when a car is too dirty to be painted. No oil change for GT Guy though. The lack of an explorable map, however, does cut down on the amount of charm this game has, and the new gadget gimmicks have certainly dropped the amount of available tracks to a smaller amount to accommodate. While the classification races are definitely helpful in making a lot of the car RPG elements stand out, it does lack a proper care and balancing once the gadgets come into play. But this game is definitely an overall improvement over the PS1 titles, especially in terms of its racing thanks to the handling changes. It's definitely needed with how much racing happens in this title specifically, but this is only the beginning for the ChoroQ HG series. Did they manage to keep the games on a path of improvement? Well, it would be a 2-year wait for fans, as the next title would come out in early 2002 with a different developer called E-Game, with Conspiracy Entertainment publishing in the US or Play It in the EU. HG2 is the one people tend to cite as the recommendation for the series, with its overseas title as Road Trip Adventure. Looking more like a JRPG title than ever, this is the game to introduce a story for the HG series. The intro kicks off with the planned retirement of the president of the world, and whoever wins the World Grand Prix will have the chance to take the presidency for themselves. There's a lot of implications of the ChoroQ world being the Japanese equivalent to Disney's Cars, where there are no humans whatsoever and every living being in this world are sentient chibi looking cars instead. We start off with our character name and the ability to choose the world's currency name with a simple goal: win each race in every license class to progress to the next one and beat the world GP so we can plunge the world into complete chaos. How are we going to achieve that? By going on a road trip. HG2 reintroduces the exploration mode but expands it massively, turning this into an open world setting where we can crash into our fellow chibi cars, gather some collectibles, discover photo houses, mini games, cities while barging into residents' homes to converse, trigger side quests, or peruse in some capitalism. The game's world itself runs on a dynamic time progression, kinda similar to the GTA games where 1 minute in game is a second on our side. This is also pretty important to note, as some NPCs will not be present in their homes depending on the time of day. Progression itself is achieved by simply following the next town signs that will direct you to the next city and their corresponding racetracks. You'd be surprised just how many things in this game are interactable. with each city containing a factory garage we can set up as a home base and teleport between one another. This is also the place to change the car parts, sign up for races, and save our game, with each factory containing different races and the license requirements to enter, corresponding with the environment of the city, with Peach Town having the closed tracks, Fuji City with the oriental Japanese tracks, Sandopolis having sandy desert tracks, and so on. Unfortunately, the oversimplified UI pretty much takes away information from the players, like how previously there would be information regarding the track overall terrain. This feels like it could have been fixed if they had shown an image of the track layout in the selection, just to inform players what kind of terrain is present. As it stands now, a lot of the tracks are kind of a trial and error issue, jumping in just to check and immediately retiring to switch to the correct parts. The tracks themselves are designed to be a lot wider due to having 24 racers at almost every race, and the handling is a bit more improved than the previous titles, but a bit too much understeer in some places. The cars feel a lot heavier than before, and they don't slide out of control as often anymore. In fact, this new handling model so far is the only one where going into a race with the wrong tires is still possible to win with enough control with the drifting. So that's definitely a welcome improvement. But in usual ChoroQ fashion, there are car RPG mechanics to alter the driving mechanics, from basic performance tuning, steering for better turning radius, tires for grip in each terrain, and some cosmetics with bodies going up to 150 bodies, rims, horn, and UIs per usual. Later upgrades, however, can go pretty wild with some monster tires, wings, and propellers to fly and swim underwater, or a rocket booster at the cost of extra fuel consumption. Oh yeah, this game has a fuel economy, but it doesn't really become relevant until the booster gadget is introduced, the endurance race, or for a couple of mini games, since it fully recovers after every loading screen. A good thing, since this game's exploration is pretty massive with the world map as it is, containing a total of 9 cities connected by the diverging roads that go all across the world. From the start with Peach Town, the Japanese-based Fuji City, the Las Vegas-inspired of Sandopolis, treacherous Chestnut Canyon, forests of Mushroom Road, snowy plains of White Mountain, Papaya Island, and Cloud Hill. Some of the cities themselves are connected in a way that makes the main road into a giant circuit, but there are also the diverging roads towards Papaya Island that takes us into underwater exploration. Some of these gadgets can be used for racing as well, some being a bit mandatory for certain minigames or to reach a specific area around the world for 100% completion. This comes in handy for some of the side quests we can receive from the random drivers all over the world, with some of them providing items and collectibles, but some of them will also open up the offer to join our party as a team racer, adding a bit more JRPG mechanics with the party system. We can have 2 other party members at any time, having to replace one whenever someone new offers to join us. The benefits of having a team racing with you is that they take up 2 other opponent slots, which reduces the total enemy from 23 to 21 cars. Their race rewards are also added on top of yours, which makes it possible to stack rewards from top 3. Sadly, you are responsible for purchasing the upgrade parts for the other party members, which triples the spending amount required, and you still have to finish in the top 6 to progress, which, to be fair, the president is going to race us in a 1v1 battle. He's not entertaining the idea of racing against someone who just gets carried by their teammates. You can technically have the other party members remain on stock just so they can slow down the other drivers, but it is generally better in the long run to have them upgraded, although because upgrades are tied to the slot and not the character, there is no need to purchase more than 3 copies of parts anyways. Alternatively, there is a way to earn money super quickly. The casino in Sandopolis only has one game type of roulette, but unlike regular roulette, here the ball is our own car, which we can control manually, letting us determine the outcome a bit easier than normal. This is very abusable with save states if you're playing on an emulator, with an easy payout of around 500k in around 10 minutes, so the economy of this game is certainly not balanced enough. Races don't cover as much of the cost for the team, with exploits for the casino carrying most of the slack. Besides the casino roulette, the game offers a ton of side activities with more unlocked within each visited city. These mini-games don't really have extravagant rewards, mostly giving collectibles and basic upgrade parts, but most are required for 100% with specific challenges for the notebook stamps, covering from dodging barrels, maze, golfing, rock climbing, soccer, and way too many to count. Just look at how many there are from this selection. The challenges themselves can be too easy or too hard due to how the physics or the game behaves, with how much it seems to constantly get confused with aerial verticality. Mini-games like golfing, dodging barrels, or the gymkhana are pretty simple and easy. Meanwhile, activities like rock climbing, volcano road, and the obstacle course can be absolute nightmare due to the game's janky physics. Others like the maze can be a bit too daunting and big due to the lack of any notable landmarks that can be used. The gymkhana can be a pain due to the understeer, and the AI are just not ready for the complexity of soccer. Long story short, the minigames in this game can range from being pretty good to interesting with questionable execution. You're gonna have to look for them first around town, with some being quite hidden and out of the way for the regular progression. But once discovered, you can always immediately revisit them from the My Garage option, where every minigame found is listed. This is something you have to discover first via an area called My Town. Located between Fuji City and Sandopolis is an empty area with only a single real estate building. For interacting with it, we are rewarded with a free garage where we can put all of our collectibles and memorabilia to decorate the place, alongside the wallpaper options, read mails from fans, friends, and access every minigame found throughout the game. But that's not the only benefit. Throughout our road trip, there's often people or cars seemingly looking for a new place to stay or open up shop. We have the choice to tell them about My City, which will result in them moving and providing their services to our town, including brand new minigames, landmarks, factory base to unlock the endurance race, ChoroQ coin collectible exchange, shops that will feature every item from all cities, and so on, turning the once barren land into a populated town with us as the central figure and all of the benefits attached. Most of these people will be so grateful that they will also offer their services to join our party. Well, they're gonna have to take a line because of the amount of people wanting to join from all over the world. Most of them will just give a simple request in the first interaction. Sometimes you'll have to revisit them for the offer to show up, but then there's going to be the one that requires a side quest completion first. While this gives the game a lot of avenues to push players into other content types, none of these side quests are listed or saved anywhere, making it hard to keep them on track. Hell, there are some that will be important to progress as well, and they don't really get listed anywhere either, with a lot of them requiring us to find a very specific character, which means talking to almost every NPC we encounter on the road, chasing them down with their weird pathing in a lot of places. It's kind of weird since the collectibles always seem to have something to point them out, like the pubs in each city providing clues to the whereabouts of local ChoroQ coins, the photo houses that will direct you to the next locations, or even optional content that gives a ChoroQ coin radar for the minimap. But their locations and placement can really reveal just how bloated this game's map is, with many areas of the world being empty as far as the eye can see. Like, it's cool that we can pretty much travel on air, in the water, and on most pieces of land, but they really don't serve much purposes with almost nothing to interact with. Now, going back on topic, why are we even bothering with people's requests and taking them into our party when we can just clear the races on our own? Well, that logic only holds up for the single races. The next phase of the game is unlocked via the World Grand Prix. A team is required for this, as we compete against 7 other teams in the leaderboards, so upgrading the party members becomes a mandatory here, or else the risk of having 2 window lickers rises significantly. The GP itself takes place in 7 chosen tracks that we've raced on before, with a similar deal of having to visit each city to trigger the race entry, so besides the team score system, not much has changed. There are some weird things with this phase, like how the game will sometimes automatically warp you to the town hosting the next GP race, but most of them will just tell you to exit the factory and warp manually. And then there's the part where they tell you hints about the racetracks, when all of these are places we've already raced on at least twice. These hints should have been something they put in the single races, to be honest. Once we are crowned as the champion, there's only one thing left to do. With the gates open, the path to challenge the president is open. The president himself is not a joke. He drives with the rocket booster attached, constantly uses it unlike most AI opponents, and he handles corners significantly better than every AI we've raced against, extremely punishing sloppy drivers and becoming the final skill check of the game. Once it's done, we become the new president of the world, as we visit each town once more, with the residents prepared to welcome their new leader. The game itself is not over yet, with some post-ending content available to 100% the game, with some exclusive body, features, and tracks available to experience. It's also a good chance to finish off the collectibles that you might have missed before, to unlock some new content as well. The game itself is an overall enjoyable and unique experience. It kind of feels like a mishmash of a lot of things. Some it does pretty well, and others not so much, but its presentation contains enough charm to just keep the adventure going for another couple hours. Heck, even with almost 20 hours of playtime, I'm sure there are things I've still yet to experience with this game, so I'd recommend anyone to try this out, even if the racing is a bit wonky. After the release of HG2, E-Game immediately went to work on their next game, so fast that they got it done in under a year even. However, there was a slight slight problem this time. The game's plan to release in the US was cancelled due to a publishing hiccup, leaving the English version to only release in the EU. Published by Zoo Digital Publishing, and this time it's titled as Gadget Racers, the exact same name as the US release of HG1. As for the gameplay itself, well, considering it's by the same developers, HG3 pretty much plays out like its predecessors in a lot of ways. Right off the bat, we're offered with a similar name and currency option, but this time the game is nice enough to also ask us things like your favorite food or your favorite famous person. I wonder what's this being used for. Unlike HG2, however, there doesn't seem to be a plot to really hook the players into progression. No story about taking the presidency or anything. Just throw you into a garage and with a shitbox to race with. It's not as aimless, since the game will also mark where to go for progression. Unlocking races now requires us to first discover them on the world map, which has now been sealed down to small interconnected areas. It really helped with reducing bloat and empty area problems from the last game. Plus it helps with giving each area more focus and details, which pretty much has a similar mechanic where we can talk to other characters on the road or barge into their homes for a conversation. This time most characters will also have their own quest lines that will also affect other quest lines. Some of these quest lines will also require opening up different maps as well, but... So, progression. How does this game handle it? The most essential comes from collecting flags. As the name suggests, it triggers certain activation flags for a lot of things. NPC conversations can change, certain quest lines may be unlocked or progressible again, different hub areas and race events become accessible. Once discovered, we can just warp between these areas and the garage to replace the absence of Q factories basically, with each area having its own style, flooding into the races themselves, like how the Grunge Garden only has one race hub taking us through the village and castle portions, Scratch Mountain covering most of the off-road and watery races to match the canyons and waterfall section, Echo Forest with the jungle races, snowy and ice races alongside a hidden mansion track, then finally Noise City with the crazier race tracks, with each track having 3 variations between the short, medium, and long courses, covering different terrains and gimmicks to the race. The design of these tracks themselves are definitely a step up from HG2's more toned down track design, taking more inspirations from ChoroQ 3 and HG1's arcadey designs, mixing a ton of small and wide variety of track designs to open up for more approaches in certain sections of the tracks, with only 12 cars on track to minimize the chaos that could happen. To get these flags, we're simply required to finish on the podium, so you can definitely just finish on 3rd and still progress. You'd be missing out on some pretty important stuff like body kits and special events, as body kits are now handled like HG1, with most of them distributed from winning races and finishing quest lines, instead of being sold on the shops. The special events themselves are kinda unique. You have this boulder thing where we have to get a ball across the circuit, the chase mode that kind of functions like a pursuit mode, and a simple coin collector mode. They don't really provide much besides a tiny bit of money. Just like the soccer and drag strip mini games that are purely for fun. For money, just look next to our house. Nico houses a bunch of mini games that are pretty much the money grind of the game, with each mini game requiring 300 cash for entry and a reward of 1500 in return, if you can beat the target time, that is. Because the game rents the parts, you can't really come in with a max-tuned car to trivialize the content. On the other hand, this also makes some of the game modes into an outright scam. Like, some of them are just way too difficult, if not impossible, to reach the target time with intended methods. For the ones that do work, it'll take some skills with this game's handling model, which has been tuned once more to be a lot heavier than even HG2's handling model. You just turn too slow, but the game has also added the ability to pull a wheelie and jump to avoid obstacles or gain the advantage with shortcuts. Unfortunately, this game is probably the worst one in regards to understeer. That power sliding became a necessity in a lot of corners. There's not really much we can do here since tuning itself has been somewhat downgraded into only body, which is purely cosmetic, and engines for performance. Then we get to the alphabetical slots, with A filled in by tires for grip on the different terrains, with some interesting options like the big tires and caterpillar tracks. Then it immediately goes into the gadgets covering both slot B and C, taking a lot of cues from HG1 with the ability to turn cars into a hovercraft, boat, or submarine to deal with watery tracks, a helicopter for higher and longer jumps, jet boosters to go faster or go sideways, and finally, a hot rod setup to add more grip into the car as it zooms faster. Most of the gadgets itself are going to be mandatory for some of the tracks, since just like HG1, every opponent will also bring in their own gadget setups. The D slot will mostly be used to put things above the cars like buildings, billboards to make money passively, items for quests to deliver, or just simple decoration. And everything below will be purely cosmetic, with stickers, decals, and horn sounds. Each 4 slots themselves can be mixed and matched depending on what part of the car gets filled up. Some gadgets can be mixed together to create better efficiency, like the boat and ski for faster and more responsive driving on water, the hot rod and booster for a makeshift rocket F1 machine, and etc. It's actually pretty interesting how it's set up, having the ability to mix and match many tools to deal with one challenge or tackle multiple at the same time. At first, these upgrades will require driving to each shop manually for purchases, but later down the line, the ability to do basically online shopping is added, which ultimately brings us to the old ChoroQ 3 setup of accessing races and shops from the comfort of our garage. Economy balancing, however, is also quite broken in this game, just not as much as it was in HG2. Besides the minigame which I mentioned previously, races rewards too little with some questline that can also provide some cash flow like the frog delivery missions. Most questlines themselves won't really provide any monetary bonuses, which I think is a bit of a mistake. Since there is a lot of them, adding in a bit of cash boost here and there would have made this game's grind a lot more manageable. Most of the things we get from them will be the basic decorations like stickers and some D-slot stuff, which are nice and all, but not really helpful most of the time. But then there's the sound disc, so we can jam out to the game's beats at our leisures. From there is just a constant back and forth to unlock more tracks, gather more money, and finally beat the game. Although sometimes you can get pieces of dialogue regarding the elusive Meister that is supposedly the final boss of the game. The problem with this plotline is that it's mostly found through optional dialogues, so it's possible for players to completely miss them and treat this person as just a random boss fight, in which the final race against the Meister will take place up in the heavens, with the credits rolling as we roll into town as the new Meister. But it's not the end of the game just yet. Yeah, this game has a mailing system as well, but for some weird reason, we can't access it in the garage. Rather, it's in the pause menu when we are exploring. And by this point, there is a lot of mail that has been stacking from throughout the game. The latest mail itself is a notification of the newly opened World Grand Prix, with each race going through 7 long courses and the final heaven track as the finale. It is interesting to see that the order has now been switched, with the Grand Prix serving as a bonus endgame content rather than a requirement to reach the ending. In the end, this game is probably the weirdest one, but mostly because of some very questionable choices and balancing. The reduction of upgrade parts has made the races significantly harder, with limited cornering, acceleration, and braking, making a lot of the endgame races ridiculously hard or heavily reliant on specific gadgets to be bearable. And once again, the economy is questionable. It feels like the game is trying to be the definitive version of the HG series by bringing every game mechanic from the past, but the execution is very lacking. The last title in the HG series would come out in 2003, switching developers back to Barnhouse Effect, published by Zoo Digital Publishing in the EU and a very familiar company in the US. And this time the overseas title is simply titled as ChoroQ, just ChoroQ. It's probably going to be confusing to overseas audiences that are more familiar with the name Gadget Racers or Penny Racers, but I suppose it's at least different from the previous games for the sake of familiarity. For the game itself, well, it kinda starts off similarly to the previous 2 titles. The choices this time are between 3 garages, which works akin to save files differentiated by the color and their placement in the town. This is to fit features to transfer resources between each save file, which potentially opens up the ability to have New Game Plus, albeit a bit unorthodox, some basic information, and favorite keychain for story cosmetic purposes. And finally, the option between 6 initial bodies to start our journey with. As for its story, however, well, we do get a bit of lore to bite early on, with the story of a racing emperor that disappeared 20 years ago, and a bit of a flashback vision to add. The game then kinda plays out like a Pokemon intro, with our character getting jumped by our self-titled rival, pretty much giving enough basic exposition about being a racer. The exploration itself is handled in a unique manner than the other HG games, requiring players to alternate between the storyline around town, from the messages we receive, to clearing race categories and Grand Prix to trigger the next set of story events. So let's talk about the exploration first. At the start, it's a bit aimless because we're just dropped into the world with no pointers or even dialogue to lead where to go. The traversal itself is now done in a sort of top-down view, which might be helpful to gauge the surroundings with a pretty basic map to help. Side quests from the previous games have also been bolstered by the addition of random encounters all over the neighborhoods. Most conversations around town mostly devolves into helpful tips or the generic conversation, with some buildings and locations providing weird bonuses. And once again, the way this game handles time is a bit peculiar. We have a clock in HG2, fixed daytime in 3, and now we're sort of dealing with a weird mixture of calendars and day or night cycle, but one that works in such a weird way it's bound to confuse people early on. The way it works is for each 3 building visits, the time moves between day or night. This is irrelevant to the length of conversation or their importance. The time of day itself also affects things like the character's availability or their services, and for each day passed, it's not actually a single day, it's actually a week. You've been in a coma for the other 6 days. After 4 weeks, the month progresses to the next one. It should be noted that single races also spends around a day and Grand Prix skips an entire month. This calendar system, however, doesn't seem to affect the exploration phase significantly. Its main purpose is mainly for the special classification races, which we'll get into in a bit. Luckily, every quest or objectives in the game won't have any time limit. For the more usual bits, there are shops scattered around each town, comprising of parts, bodies, and paint shop and garage remodel shop. We don't have to revisit them every time an upgrade is required. Once visited, each shop can be opened from the garage menu. As per tradition, this is our main racing hub, where we can check out our current build, the calendar races, mail, jump a month forward, and the unlock shops. For the races themselves, seeing as this is developed by Barnhouse Effect from HG1, they of course had to reintroduce things like classification and spec races. These will usually require specific type of engines, ECU, gearing, and every side of a body kit. These single races are primarily there to add some spice with restrictions and some higher payout as a bonus. But for progression, simply focus on the races on the left, covering the Beginner's Cup, Holiday, Fight, and Pro Cup. With these races specifically not having any restrictions to mention, only having their length be the differing factor. These cups' difficulty are also indicated by the level number at the bottom right, which are not accurate as the AI may end up being easy or hard depending on the tracks themselves, with the map being split into 5 different island regions to sort out separate each track's themes. Like the first island that is entirely composed of official closed circuits on the oval, beach, or even up in the sky. Another island that is based on Japanese aesthetics with its buildings and decorations, or the other islands containing some bizarre concepts like pyramids, haunted castles, a giant toy room, outer space, or even inside a computer world. Some of these tracks also have their own specific gimmicks, like the forest, island, and Japanese tracks having a bit of off-road or water canal sections, with some random appearance of UFOs shooting down laser beams occasionally. The physics of the game itself seems to be fine, as the understeer doesn't feel as bad as the previous game with the ability to upgrade steering once again. Unfortunately, some of the changes added into this game have significantly pushed the racing consistency into being frustrating. For example, the game will punish players for attempting to drift or power slide, causing the car to spin out by sliding sideways too much. This is also mixed in with some very inconsistent bouncing that can randomly happen after every airtime, or how badly the car will react to the smallest of bumps, resulting in a random chance for the game to completely stop you dead after losing control for a couple of seconds. While there are ways to lower the chance of this happening, even with the highest upgrade available, this will still happen often enough to ruin races in the higher difficulties. To progress, we don't really need to be first, just a podium finish is enough. But just like last time, you'd be missing out on some cool new bodies to try out with. After beating the classifications, a new set of story events will unlock, or at least it should. Because of how this game is structured, there are other requirements to trigger these events. They're usually things like meeting certain characters and clearing side activities, like the first one that kicks off our adventure, directing us to a gang of street racers called the Tough Chick. Beat them and we'll meet our new mentor, the guy from the intro cutscenes with the nightmares. Lose and you're pretty much screwed. This is actually quite evil from the developers. These guys just straight up leave you broke like that, especially with how precious every penny is for upgrades in the early stage. Beat the Beginner Cup and the next set of story events would unlock with a challenge from a first grader and their brother who just so happens to be the leader of the Tough Chicks gang. Complete the next set of cups to receive a challenge by a rival and their progression to joining a team, which unlocks the team mechanics and the GP races, this time taking some of the ideas from HG2 and its team races. You may think because the game has 3 cities with its own teams, that means we have 3 options to choose from, but one of them has been joined by a rival which drops the options to 2 teams instead. This is however also the point where the game's difficulty reaches its peak, as the AI opponents for the GP are much more powerful than the other race modes. Not only that, but this game in general has added a new feature with the AI, giving them the ability to block or straight up murder you into a wall. This is paired with the game's tendency to cause cause the car to randomly bounce, and the fact that they brought back chassis and tire durability exclusively for the GP, these events instantly turn into a nightmare. There are ways to reduce the bounces by purchasing a chassis upgrade, which also increases the durability, but it's also not a surefire way to reduce the chances of it happening, especially as most of the options come at the cost of lower acceleration, which basically means you'd also need to invest in a much bigger engine, but they are very expensive and will require some amount of grinding to get the highest available tier in the shops. And that's not the only piece of upgrade to get, with more important options for the tires for grip, brake disc, steering for better turning radius, gearing and ECUs for higher top speed with automatic and manual options, and turbos for more acceleration. Then we have the body parts with front bumper, hood, top, spoilers, rear bumper, and side parts for things like better aerodynamics, increasing acceleration and top speed, more durability, and the ability to push opponents away, or some of the more simplified gadgets to help deal with things like deep water sections or snowy areas. These upgrade parts on their own look fine, and early on they seem to be reasonably priced, but the further we go, the more ludicrous they become, turning the game into yet another grindy experience. After reaching a certain mileage, we are able to visit the other town areas, unlocking more shops with higher tier upgrades. The highest a race can pay out during this section is 15,000 for the monthly rotating events. Other options could come from the part-time jobs, ranging from different menial tasks like delivering packages between towns, taking packages from houses around town, collecting garbage, or patrolling the city. They all play and pay differently as well, and all of this is just so you can be at least a bit competitive enough for the GP, as the opponents are still going to be quite the challenge even at max out upgrades. Luckily, beating the GP itself only requires the team to win, meaning even if your individual scores places you low, the teammate can still carry the slack. All we have to do is go to the team page, choose the appropriate team to pick depending on their mood for the month, and then change their set of parts depending on the track layout. At worst, they should place in third or fourth, but in most cases they'll carry the race and control the top two places. But surely we can do better than just rely on our teammates. But at this point we've seen most of the items from the shops, and there's nothing else that can top them, right? Well, let's go back a bit. During the early exploration phase, you might have received some letters regarding some NPCs that are known to give away things to racers. All of the given items, however, are not directly usable. They're mainly parts that need to be assembled first, which indicates there's probably some kind of crafting system in the game, and apparently there is one. Only problem is how many side quests you are going to have to go through to unlock them, and they're all completely optional. It all starts when our rival mails us something regarding an inventor in the second city of Poki, leading us towards a character that will shove an experimental engine on us for a short survival minigame, who will then lead us to a bar where we can meet with a mechanic, except we also need to spend a bit of time for them to spawn in the bar. When they do spawn, we then get to have a checkup minigame, which according to the community has a varying effect on our racing performance depending on the dialogue options. Then we have to find a tire polisher in Poki and specifically interact with them when they're visibly asleep, giving them 1k donation, and just like with the mechanic, you have to pass the time for them to wake up, for them to give us their book of racing records. We then take this book to a noble congressman in the third city of Nayaki, who will offer us 12,000 in cash for the book. After this, we have to return to the garage and read a letter from our mentor to trigger a new set of dialogues with the congressman, which will enable a set of dialogue options. If answered correctly, the congressman will give us a letter of recommendation to the footbar laboratory in the third town. But wait a minute, we can't just go to the lab now. We have to return to the garage once more to read another letter from our mentor about this lab's grand opening to enable the lab as a vendor, and then finally we get access to the synthesis feature of the game. This right here is the exact reason why this game's RPG system is way above the grade of what its predecessor attempted to achieve. Almost every quest is chained to another quest that will trigger another quest or a brand new feature and minigames we've never seen before. This is only one example of how crazy it can get, and this synthesis mechanic is completely missable. So surely their parts are not going to be that much better than the best store has to offer.
What the hell is even that?
Unfortunately, synthesis still requires a ton of cash, and you'll run into the game's nasty part ownership limit with garage remodel costs going upwards to the 100,000s. Plus, the materials acquiring methods themselves are completely random, turning most of the endgame grind into a constant back and forth between 4 to 5 NPCs that will give the most relevant part, some of which also require completion of their own side quests to start giving out items. All of this while also grinding for more money in the races. This crazy RPG element becomes a whole lot more prevalent the further we go into the story. Our rival comes in with a proposition to race in the next GP. This effectively makes the next Grand Prix into a special type where one of the opponents gets replaced by our rival with a somewhat tougher set of opponents. And once we're done with the Grand Prix, the convoluted part of the story begins, with our rival disappearing for a whole month and appearing in the hospital a month later. The game doesn't tell you, but you actually have to visit them twice to trigger the next part of the story, with our mentor directing us to the bar in Poketown, where the owner will talk more about the old racing legends and give us a Choro coin so we can access the cafe in Nayaki Town. There we can meet with one of the royalty, specifically Princess Ania, who we raced against in some of the races in the last 2 GPs. For clearing her challenge, she gives us a letter of reference so we can meet with the racing emperor himself, Otto, with the next GP being locked in as a battle against the emperor. Before that happens, however, we get locked into a bunch of cutscenes and dialogues, giving us a ton of exposition about the characters and their relationships with one another, alongside our rival's damning situation. The final GP against the emperor itself is an extra special GP compared to the last one. We're not allowed to save for the whole duration. There are also some special events that will happen during the races, like how in the third race, Otto's overzealous teammate will cause an accident with ours, causing a massive scene and the yellow flag being given out, putting us at lap 4 in a duel against Otto at the front. Both ours and Otto's team will be filled in by the second member, given completely unique dialogue for the remainder of the GP. The fourth race is pretty normal again, until the final race up in the sky where Otto gets a sudden power boost at the very start, making him untouchable for the rest of the race, until our rival somehow shows up and gives us an edge with the power of friendship. Which would be pretty cool if we could see the edges of the tracks at least. But I suppose the power boost alone was already a massive drain, as we received some very shocking news during the victory celebrations, putting a very bittersweet ending to the main story of HG4. I'm mostly skimming through the story to not spoil as many details as possible, but it has to be said, they definitely tried to add a whole lot more nuance into this game's storytelling, that it can feel like a JRPG first and a racing game second at a lot of points. Compared to the simple narrative in HG2 and 3 about becoming the very best, here they really tried to add a whole collection of unique characters that will contribute to the story, each of them paving the way for our character's journey, with a lot of twists and turns along the way. Unfortunately, there are some nasty traps hidden with this last GP, as our mentor will leave for a journey permanently, leaving any side quests relating to him uncompletable for pretty much forever, which also includes the parts he can exclusively give for synthesis, locking out any chances of getting 100% completion. To do that, we'll have to turn back time and postpone Otto's GP challenge. 100% completion in this game includes collecting every single item and parts the game has to offer, and beating every single race, GPs, and minigame events all over the place. A lot of these things will be hidden behind side quests, which may require a ton of random exploration or having a guide up on the side. For parts items, the biggest problem will stem from the constant need of cash and synthesis parts, as they are given out randomly by every relevant NPC, costing a ton of in-game days just driving between each character's house just to hope they will drop the correct parts. Or in the case of our mentor, he'll give out super rare parts every year on our birthday, which means spending several in-game years to get all the important parts. Once you do get them, it's just a matter of collecting the money, which is where finishing all these races comes in handy. We've covered the spec races and special races which will rotate on a monthly basis. The GP itself is actually pretty unique, as this game actually has 6 GPs in total, taking place every 2 months, each having a completely different set of tracks and body reward at the end. The other 2 unknowns are things we get to unlock later down the line, with one unlocked from a side quest in Pokebar and the other unlocked during the post-endgame section after defeating Otto. These races were exceedingly difficult by comparison, with only the best of the best taking breaking parts. Even with some of the best synthesis parts, they'll still pose a ton of challenges. In the case the races become too tiresome or frustrating, there are mini games to play and try out around the towns. From something simple like the part-time jobs of just driving around town, catching bank thieves, doing chicken races on the harbor, or a first-hand experience of dating girls. Or maybe you want to play a horror survival game with zombie cars smashing you or becoming a firefighter. It's kind of insane to see how many mini games are in this title, especially with how many of them are not just simply racing with a twist or basic obstacle courses, which in my opinion becomes a general best of from the series. HG4 may not have the biggest world exploration, nor does it have the best racing feel or experience, but it makes up for it by having some of the biggest depth in its RPG mechanics that it affects almost every aspect of the game. And you can tell they definitely tried to expand on it with the story this time around, having a ton of depth for even some of the character writing and making them into rewards for going after side content. It gives off a completely different experience to any other HG ChoroQ game before this, but that's also what makes the ChoroQ series unique on its own. Every single one of the games I've played so far has managed to convey different experiences, making it hard to really tell which game is truly better than the rest, as each developer tries to improve by adding and removing things at the cost of causing the quality of each game to constantly fluctuate. But the HG series is not the end of the ChoroQ game adaptation, with Bar House Effect still working on several games afterwards like ChoroQ Works and ChoroQ Wii, although only the Wii game got a non-Japanese release. Unfortunately, after these two outings, they only made 4 more games, and they're all mobile titles, and then nothing. 2014 was the last year a ChoroQ game would come out, and since then there has been nothing new to mention. The toys themselves are still going strong to this day, with many adoring fans, now adults, and their own kids clamoring for something different from the usual realistic style of toys. There were speculations as to why the video game development stopped. The most plausible one was due to the merger between Takara and competitor company Tomy in 2006, leading to the shift of making console titles to mobile titles, before it eventually fizzles out. Now normally I'd say this is why the series is an abandoned gem, but I've been proven wrong before, so maybe if people make enough noise, they'll make a ChoroQ game just like another Japanese series. In our current landscape, a car RPG showing up to the scene one more time could be the big shakeup that we need outside of the indie scene. So Takara Tomy got a big chance here, if they're willing of course.